Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I hope you've had a lovely, lovely day and are about to settle down to enjoy a fabulous story. And I'm sure you remember Pokemon cards, don't you? Some of them have actually, gained an exponential amount of value, and this story centers around Pokemon cards. And who would have thought that Pokemon cards would actually lead to a Bigfoot encounter? But actually, that's exactly what happens in this story. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I stared at the computer in disbelief. I could hear the booming sound of my heart thundering through my chest, while the music on the radio in the background blasted out some rather lame hip-hop music that was not exactly to my rather selective taste. I bent forward to scrutinize the computer screen more closely, almost as if I was doubting what I was actually seeing. I spent a great deal of time in front of the computer, I'm afraid to say, and my mother was always concerned that it wasn't healthy to stare at the screen all day long. I was a university student at the time, but even though I was in my early 20s, my mother thought I should be out there in the backyard pumping some blood through my veins, or at least going for a bicycle ride up one of the country trails close to home, which was something I frequently had done as a child. I'd always enjoyed the great outdoors, and living in the Pacific Northwest, you could say the natural world was my quintessential playground. Since I became a university student, I'm ashamed to admit, I'd got a tad lazy. So in my spare time I tended to play around on my computer, which I know in the grand scheme of things is not a terribly healthy thing to do. It can't be, I thought. There is no way. But as I examined the information on the computer more intently, to my amazement, there was absolutely no mistake. The Pokemon cards I'd collected when I was younger were worth over $40,000, if that were at all possible. I was in shock, as if someone had thrown a grenade through my bedroom window and made me jump right out of my skin. But not in a bad way, of course, because all this was good, very promising indeed. I could hardly imagine what I would do with that amount of money. I was a broke medical student, burdened by hefty student loans and rental costs, so money like this would quite literally be like manna from heaven. Ostensibly for me in my pitiful financial state, $40,000 was tantamount to winning the lottery. It was a lot of money. I took in a deep, measured breath, unable to steady the shooting spasms of excitement that rang through me like waves of ebullient electricity that could not be contained. Oh my goodness, $40,000! I kept saying to myself over and over again, as if even the words I was speaking out loud in my mind were playing cruel tricks on me. How was it remotely possible that the Pokemon cards I'd collected as a boy were worth so much now and had gained in monetary value over the years? I had never taken those cards at all seriously when I'd collected them, but I never envisaged that those cards would be a sound investment. But I rather suspect, had I known such a thing, that I'd have been a lot more serious about collecting them, as I was always quite savvy as a kid. I was suddenly hit with the unpleasant, rather worrying thought that seemed to sit at the back of my throat like a nasty, clawing lump that was rather hard to swallow. There was only one problem. Where the hell were those Pokemon cards? The last time I'd seen those cards, they'd been placed in the London bus tin, in the large cardboard box in our attic, along with a lot of other stuff I'd thrown into the box, from little cards, board games, puzzles, marbles, dominoes, snakes and ladders, and the list goes on and on. The trouble was our attic was in our old home, and my parents had moved 2 streets away from our original house, for my mother had decided our old home was a little on the large side. My mother had wanted to downsize, as our family had shrunk over the years, so my parents had moved to a small cottage called Twinkle Star. I don't know who chose to call the cottage such a strange name, but it kind of suited the place, because in its own endearing way, it was almost as charming as a piece of poetry. I had not been happy about the move, but my two older siblings, Claudia, who was 16 years my senior, and Paul, 18 years older than I was, had left home a long time ago, and were both married with kids of their own. I was the late lamb in our family, and let's just say my impromptu, unexpected arrival in their lives had not been planned at all. I had been the surprise that they had never anticipated, like a letter in the post that somehow got mislaid for years and years, and then arrives at your home 20 years too late. When my mother fell pregnant with me, she was 49 years old, and on the cusp of turning 50. She mistakenly believed she had gone into the menopause. Her stomach had enlarged quite significantly, so she assumed she had gained the dreaded menopausal belly fat that the magazines she read had warned her about. She'd learnt that the menopause can bring on such rather unpleasant side effects. My mother complained tirelessly about her ever-expanding waistline, when she discovered to her horror that all her clothes had grown far too tight, and some of them she could no longer wear and needed to be discarded. My mother became incredibly frustrated, as she had to buy for herself a brand new wardrobe of clothes. Her girlfriends told her not to worry about it, as gaining weight when you entered the menopause was a pretty standard thing to do, but that was small comfort to my mother, who hated the look of her changing body. She'd been pregnant twice before, and yet failed to recognize the telltale symptoms of pregnancy that most women might have actually noticed. I think she was so convinced she was going through the menopause, it never crossed her mind for a moment that she might actually be pregnant. She didn't experience the usual symptoms of nausea or morning sickness, but was permanently exhausted and depressed all the time, and she reached a place in her life where she only had to look at food and then she'd put on weight. Soon my mother couldn't stand looking at her reflection in the mirror for a moment longer. If she could have waged war against her own reflection, she'd have done just that. She knew she needed to address the menopausal weight gain that had made her feel rather self-conscious, so she went on every diet plan she could that involved reducing belly fat, which she was told by a personal trainer at the local gym would never ever happen. "Ma'am," he told her, in his attempts to be kind, "I hate to tell you this, but you can't spot reduce fat like that. It doesn't work in that way, despite what they may tell you." "But surely I can," my mother insisted. "How many sit-ups must I do to get rid of this horrible bulge around my middle that refuses to budge? I'm struggling to fit into my clothes. I'm sure you don't know what that feels like," she said woefully, glancing at the trainer's six-pack that made her suddenly feel like a squidgy sponge. The trainer, sensing my mother thought that he was born with his six-pack abs, said to her, "I used to be the fat boy at my school, believe it or not, that was teased relentlessly for my size. One day I'd had enough, so I focused on getting into shape, and I never looked back. So yes, ma'am, believe it or not, I do know what it feels like to be carrying extra weight that you don't want, and what a struggle it can be to lose it. But what I'm saying here is don't lose heart. Where there's a will, there's a way. I can put you on a specialized exercise program, and within 6 months you'll start to see some results." 6 months? My mother had said. "Are you joking? I haven't got that kind of patience. Absolutely not. I need my extending waistline to be nipped in the bud now, or God knows what I will look like." "Sorry, ma'am. The body does not work like that. Everything takes time. Surely you've heard the saying that Rome was not built in a day. Every effort you make in life is a work in progress. You don't just build a house without preparing the foundation first, do you?" My mother didn't believe for a second that the personal trainer was telling her the truth about previously being fat. She did not believe he understood her dilemma, and surmised that he probably told all his clients he'd been fat in order to actively encourage them to aim for the stars. It was impossible for her to feel he could ever have struggled with his weight. She chose not to hire his services again, because if it really took 6 months to practically kill yourself in the gym just to get some small gains, It wasn't worth all the effort as far as my mother was concerned. Things were worse on the home front for my mother. My father would relentlessly tease her that she looked pregnant and had taken to calling her Tubby, and my mother abhorred that. One day she got so grievously upset with my father for making fun of her menopausal belly that she refused to share a bed with him for an entire week, even though my father assured her that even if she looked like she was carrying triplets, he would still love her regardless. My mother wasn't amused by any of this, and it seemed every day she was fighting her own body, that appeared to have a mind of its own, resolutely determined to do its own thing, and stubbornly getting bigger and bigger every passing day. And yet still, my mother didn't realize she was pregnant. All I can say in my defense is that I must have been a pretty lazy baby, luxuriating in my mother's womb as if it was a day at the spa, and refusing to notify her of my clandestine presence in her womb. My mother was such a perceptive woman. Some described her as sharp as a tack. So it is rather incredulous to think that she never sensed, even intuitively, that she was carrying me. Nor did she feel me kicking in her belly. My mother, in the latter stage of her pregnancy, became increasingly discouraged about her weight. She went to visit her doctor for a checkup and was immediately put on a lengthy diet plan. Dr. Blanchard told my mother to step on the scale in his offices. His brow was raised in shock horror at the number that he was seeing. For my mother's, whose weight had always been stable as long as the doctor had known her, had put on 25 pounds in the last 7 months, and putting weight on this rapidly, at such an alarming rate, was worrying to say the very least. Dr. Blanchard put it all down to the menopause, not stopping for a second to consider that there might be a very obvious explanation for my mother's weight increase. You would think it would be standard practice for a woman with an increased girth to be given a pregnancy test, but shock horror, that never actually happened. "Good Lord, Mrs. Carrington," said Dr. Blanchard, as he studiously took my mother's weight down in his notepad. "You are 25 pounds heavier than your previous weight. That's a rapid increase in weight, Mrs. Carrington. Your weight has always been stable as long as I have known you." My mother's eyes widened in horror, for she'd always been conscious of her weight, but to put 25 pounds on, well, that was horrifying. "I don't know what to do, Dr. Blanchard," my mother said. "I feel like a pudding. Nothing fits me any more. I've had to buy a whole new wardrobe of clothes. My husband is calling me Tubby. That's my new nickname." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Carrington. The menopause can be a challenging time for many women. You haven't been experiencing hot flushes, have you, by any chance?" "Good Lord, no! Can I expect that to happen as well? Isn't getting menopausal belly enough?" "I'm afraid with the changing hormones, women do appear to develop different symptoms, but the weight gain is something that can be addressed. With the right diet and exercise program, I'm most sure." "I know you won't believe me, Dr. Blanchard, because nobody ever does. But I promise you I am watching what I eat very, very carefully. But my weight keeps inexplicably going up. Do you think something else is going on with me? I heard somewhere when you have a toxic liver, your stomach can get very extended. Do I perhaps need to detoxify my liver? Is that what is going on here?" Dr. Blanchard looked at my mother kindly. "Mrs. Carrington, there is nothing wrong with your liver, I'm most sure. There is a practical explanation for your weight gain." "There is?" my mother asked, hope registering in her eyes, for she knew if she could find the cause of her weight gain, then hopefully it could finally be addressed once and for all. Mr. Blanchard might have some answers for her, and some pills to prescribe her that might just treat her problems. "Look, Mrs. Carrington, I don't want to offend you in any way, but maybe your appetite has increased. You say you've been feeling tired and drained all the time. And let's just say when people get depleted of their energy reserves, which often happens in the menopause, they turn to food to feel better. Maybe you're lying to yourself about how much you're actually eating," he said. "It's very common for us to overlook these extra hidden calories found in food. And before you know it, you begin to balloon. That's what I really think is going on here. I'm afraid, Mrs. Carrington, the menopause is a tumultuous time for women your age, and belly fat is more common than you know. You're just going to have to be more scrupulously careful with your diet and watch what you eat more attentively. Stay away from those sugary sweets. No more doughnuts," he said, waving an accusing finger at my mother, as if he half expected her to have half a dozen doughnuts stuffed up her shirt that she intended to secretly devour when no one was actually looking. "My advice to you, Mrs. Carrington, make a point of checking the calories at the grocery store before you put those items you buy into your trolley. You'll be surprised how many hidden calories are in the food. Just because something says it's low calorie doesn't mean it actually is. There's a lot of deceptive marketing out there designed to trick you so that you buy products you shouldn't be buying. My advice to you is to cut out carbs and sugar. Try and eat more lean meat and vegetables, and then you'll lose the weight in no time at all. Look at me," said Dr. Blanchard, patting his flat stomach very proudly. "I've been eating a high-protein diet for the last 8 months or so, and I've lost a significant amount of weight, and I think I'm looking pretty good." My mother looked at Dr. Blanchard with an expression of exasperation on her face. She had come to the doctor's office to be told how she could address her weight increase, but all she'd received from the doctor was a lecture about what she should and should not be eating, which was something my mother was well informed about. She didn't need his advice on all this. My mother made a face. "I'm not eating sugar or carbs, Dr. Blanchard. I'm very careful about what I eat, and I haven't touched a doughnut in years." "That's what they all say," said Mr. Blanchard, giving my mother a mischievous wink. "It's easy to pretend to ourselves, Mrs. Carrington, that we're not eating all that much, when the truth is very different. It's called secret eating, and I'm afraid a lot of us do it." My mother told me after Dr. Blanchard had informed her that her inexplicable weight gain could be easily explained by her secret overindulgences, as obviously the doctor believed my mother had stashed away tons of Haagen-Dazs ice cream in her freezers, along with extra treats in her store cupboard, that she was eating behind the scenes at will, which was absolutely not true. My mother felt like she wanted to box Dr. Blanchard's ears. It would seem the doctor had practically accused her of being in abject denial about what she was eating, when all along my mother had been fastidiously tracking her calories with the vigilance of a ballet dancer. My mother told me she was so frustrated with Dr. Blanchard and was feeling so dumpy and unattractive. When my mother climbed into her car after her doctor's appointment with Dr. Blanchard, she fisted her steering wheel. She was so furious, almost as if she was punching the doctor himself. And then she said, "That's it! I've had enough. I can't cope any more. I don't care if I'm fat." In that quintessential moment, my mother decided if she was going to be fat, she might as well embrace it. So she drove herself to the nearest bakery, where she bought over a dozen doughnuts. My mother said the doughnuts were utterly magnificent, and she sat in the car scoffing them all, and feeling after her sugar rush, as if the world was a much more convivial place after all. And so what if her clothes failed to fit any more? It wasn't the end of the world, was it? And if her husband continued to call her Tubby, so be it. She'd find him an equally degrading nickname that would easily put him in his place. Suffice to say that random trip to the baker's became one of many, and before long my mother began to get cravings for doughnuts all the time. She'd clandestinely take herself off to the baker's, where she'd sit in her car, listen to the radio, and stuff her face with dozens of doughnuts. She'd drive herself home, with the telltale sign of her sugar rush left behind on her lips. When my mother's stomach began to become even more extended, she still didn't realize she was pregnant. It never crossed her mind that maybe that was what was going on here. She assumed the extra weight was caused by her guilty secret, and felt incredibly annoyed with herself for having absolutely no self-control, as far as her doughnut addiction was concerned. One day, as my mother had made a return trip to the bakery to buy yet more doughnuts, while she was standing behind a few people in the queue, her waters broke. The man standing behind my mother in the queue looked at her in horror, as water came pouring out between my mother's legs onto the floor of the bakery. "Oh, my word!" a woman cried out. "Please move away, everyone! Get out of the way! This woman's waters have broken!" Everyone began to cheer for my mother, realizing that she would soon be giving birth. This wonderful woman who'd been standing in the queue at the bakery just so happened to work as a nurse at the local hospital. She efficiently took my mother in her charge, offering her reassurances that all would be well. "Your waters have broken," she told my mother. "You must be so excited about your baby, because he or she will be here soon. Are you expecting a girl or a boy?" she asked my mother. My mother looked like a stunned goldfish that had had an electric shock. She went as white as a sheet, the colour draining from her skin. All this time my mother had privately been thinking she was getting fat, all because of the menopause, but she had actually been pregnant all along. If this was a joke, it wasn't even remotely funny. But my mother knew that with her waters breaking, she couldn't be in denial any more. She had to face reality. But it was too much for her to stomach at the time. "I'm not pregnant," my mother told the woman. "I'm just fat." The nurse had laughed at my mother. "You're joking, right? I'm sorry to tell you this, ma'am, but you're about to have a baby." "A baby?" my mother said, repeating the nurse's words. "But are you sure?" "Very sure," said the nurse. "Surely you must have known you were pregnant. You even looked pregnant. I noticed you in the queue." "I thought it was menopausal weight gain," my mother said. At this the nurse laughed. "I can't believe you didn't know you were pregnant. This is hilarious. Of course women experience weight gain around the belly during menopause, but not all of them do. And they certainly don't look 9 months pregnant, like you so clearly do. I can't believe you didn't realise you were pregnant. I'd have thought it was blindingly obvious." Ostensibly, even Dr. Blanchard had failed to recognise the symptoms of my mother's pregnancy, which was really bizarre, given he was a doctor. Random people had asked my mother when her baby was due, but she'd never taken them seriously, describing such people as being deliberately rude. Sometimes I privately wonder if my mother was lying to herself all those years ago about her mysterious weight gain. I mean, after all, you do hear of teenagers who subconsciously know that they've fallen pregnant, but they refuse to admit it to themselves, in the hope that their pregnancy will just go away because it wasn't really real in the first place. Possibly my mother couldn't envisage having another baby so many years after she'd given birth to my brother and sister. Perhaps she lied to herself about what was really going on with her, as living in denial pushes away reality, although eventually the truth will catch up with you and expose the denial, rather like a bright red rash across the skin that you simply cannot ignore any longer. By the time my mother was escorted to the hospital by ambulance with a kind nurse at her side offering her encouraging words, she had gone into labour, and it was far too late for the doctors to give her an epidural. It would seem that nothing was going to stop my immediate arrival into this world, and my mode of transportation was extremely fast, like a roller coaster, for I didn't give my mother any time to prepare for me. My mother said when women get older, having a baby can sometimes be an enormous challenge for them. But in her pregnancy with me, she never experienced any problems, nor did she have any pain while giving birth to me, unlike the agony she experienced with my 2 older siblings, where both births had involved long drawn-out labours. According to my mother, I was so eager to be born, even though I had been reticently reserved in her womb, that I came out of her birthing canal rather like a freight train that simply refused to stop. The doctor on duty was so impressed, he claimed I was one of the easiest and fastest deliveries he had ever seen in his entire life. It was pretty impressive, given my mother was on the verge of turning 50, and older women tend to struggle more with deliveries, but my mother's was effortlessly easy. The doctor could not believe my mother had had no prenatal care, but he said she was in excellent condition, and perhaps those sweet donuts had given her the much-needed energy she required to deliver me. After I was born, my mother called my father to tell him she was in hospital, but she never told him precisely why. So my father rushed over to the hospital frantically, fearing that something quite awful had happened to my mother. When he was directed to the maternity ward for his visit, he was more than a little bemused, wondering what on earth was going on, and had there been some mistake. I am told my mother presented me to my father in a small little bundle, and she said, "Hello, Otter. I'm so glad you've come finally. Say hello to my menopausal belly fat, won't you?" My father took one look at me, his eyes widened in amazement, and he said, "We've just had a baby. How is that even possible? I thought you said your belly weight was menopausal." "I know I said that," my mother agreed, "but I'm afraid it wasn't, Otter. I had no clue I was pregnant. Even Dr. Blanchard practically told me I was getting fat. How was I supposed to know I was actually pregnant? I didn't believe it was possible at my age. I didn't give it a second thought, did I?" "I can't believe a professional doctor could not tell you were pregnant," my father had said furiously. "What kind of a doctor is Mr. Blanchard, if he can't even diagnose the fact that you had a bun in the oven? He should have recognized the symptoms, even if you didn't. I mean, you were close to the menopause, yes, that's true. But there's still a chance you could have been pregnant. But he didn't even bother to give you a pregnancy test. Shame on him. That's what I say. I don't know whether to be angry with him or absolutely thrilled because you've given birth to a beautiful baby today. It's the best news ever, although I'm very disappointed that I can't call you Tubby anymore." "You really are happy about this baby, are you, Otter?" my mother had asked my father, looking rather concerned, for she wondered if my fortuitous arrival might upset my father, as after all my older siblings had long since left home, and my mother wondered if being a father again for my dad would be all too much, and more of a nuisance than a blessing. "Of course I'm delighted you've had a baby, boy. There is nothing wrong with having a late lamb. I think it is wonderful, wonderful news. There is nothing more fulfilling in this life than family." So there you are. That's the rather idiosyncratic story of how I came to be in this world, and it's so significant to the story that I'm about to share with you. I hasten to say my mother never did visit Dr. Blanchard again, and can you blame her for that? Even today she has a weakness for doughnuts, but her trim waistline soon returned within weeks of delivering me, much to her delight. I was now 22 years old and was a medical student at university. I was away from home a lot of the time, as I was living in rental accommodation close to the university campus with 4 other students like myself. It was while I was at university, unbeknown to me, a cottage in our prepossessing rural neighbourhood came on the market, which would turn my life as I knew it upside down. The cottage was called Twinkle Star. It was 2 streets away from where my parents lived, and I used to cycle past Twinkle Star quite regularly. My mother thought it was one of the most prepossessing, magnificent little cottages she had ever seen in her life, as it was utterly charming, with whitewashed walls, a thatched roof, a white picket fence, and roses growing around the front door. Even as a boy, I always thought the cottage looked as if it had been snatched out of a fairy tale. I remember my mother telling me that when I left home for good, it was that cottage that she would buy if it ever came onto the market. Then she'd snap it up in a heartbeat, but I'd never taken her very seriously on that. One day as I was at university, my mother was driving down the road, not too far from our home, past Twinkle Star Cottage, the place she'd always admired. She noticed to her astonishment a for sale sign outside the cottage. She promptly turned her car around and immediately raced home to tell my father the exciting news. "You won't believe it, Otter," she told him. "You know that beautiful, beautiful cottage, Twinkle Star, that I've admired for years? It's come on the market. It's for sale. Isn't that brilliant news? It couldn't be better timing, now that Adam has practically left home." My father at the time was listening to a podcast and wasn't really listening to my mother. So my mother, who was resolutely determined to get his undivided attention, snatched my father's cell phone away from him, dumping it into the fruit bowl. "What did you do that for, love?" my father bristled, giving my mother a frustrated glare. "I was listening to something very informative, I'll have you know, and then you interrupted me like this. I don't appreciate that." "I don't care what you were listening to," my mother snapped. "You need to listen to me. Haven't you heard a word I've just said?" My father frowned. "Some cottage you like is up for sale. Big deal. Why do I care about that?" "Not some cottage, not any cottage, Otter. The cottage I've always loved. Twinkle Star is up for sale. It's 2 streets away from this house." "What about it?" my father said somewhat lamely. I know the cottage you mean, but what has that got to do with us? Is that all you can say, Otter? Twinkle Star is my dream cottage. I've told you that for years. Have you not been paying any attention to what I've said? If you will remember, I told you when the kids left home that I wanted to downsize. Well, when I say kids, our other two have left home long ago. But I'm talking about Adam now. I'm sorry, love. But admit it, this house of ours is far too large just for two people to rattle around in for the foreseeable future. Without Adam around anymore, it feels like an empty box. I mean, the house was large with just Adam here. But now he's barely here these days, and will doubtlessly be spreading his wings very soon, and this house will feel even more empty. Think about it, love. We're not getting any younger. And personally for me, I really feel managing a house this size is extremely hard work. I want more time on my hands to do things I enjoy and love, to devote time to gardening and doing some of my hobbies. I want my life to be easier, not more difficult. There's an excessive amount of cleaning to be done in this house. I do it all, so you don't realise how it gets me down at times. It's exhausting work, let me tell you. These days I don't have the energy I used to have when I was younger, and the older I get, the tougher the chores around the house become. I want to be doing stuff I enjoy in my retirement years, not worrying about cleaning all the time. Honestly. What is all this about, love? Said my father, still eyeing his cell phone in the fruit bowl, longingly, like a dog drooling over his bone. Don't you get it, love? Do I have to spell everything out to you? I need you to call the estate agents right away and put an offer in for Twinkle Star Cottage, and then make arrangements to sell this house of ours. There's no time to lose. We can't afford to lose Twinkle Star Cottage. If we do, we're going to seriously regret it. Love, you're being ridiculous. This is a spur-of-the-moment decision on your part. Let's think about this more carefully before we rush into things like this, shall we? My mother grabbed my father's cell phone from the fruit bowl, holding it tightly in her hand. You're only getting this back after you call the estate agents, Otter. We need to move on this, and it's not going to happen until you get off your big fat backside and do something about it. I'll have you know there is nothing wrong with my backside, love, said my father with a grin. He loved it when my mother got cheeky towards him. There'll be more than a big fat backside to be worrying about, Otter, if you carry on sitting on this chair glued to your cell phone. Get a move on, will you? Call the estate agents right now. My father knew you didn't say no to my mother. We all knew that growing up. As once my mother got a bee in her bonnet about something, you could never refuse her. So my father had no choice but to call the estate agent, to put an offer in for Twinkle Star Cottage. And then our home was put on the market. And when I returned home for a 3-week break, lo and behold, I found myself returning not to my childhood home, where I'd been raised as a boy, but to Twinkle Star Cottage of all things. In that moment I did rather feel like a baby being thrown out with the bathwater, as returning to a cottage I'd only ever seen in passing as a boy, rather than to my beloved home that I had always loved, was extremely difficult. So there we are, that is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.